Hello again. I don't really care to do these videos quite so close together. However, most of the rest of my week is going to be out of town. So if I want to meet my challenge, I got to do number 2 right now. And so that's what I'm doing. I hope the one that I did earlier today uh, gave you a reasonably clear idea of the issue of uh, ending up living somebody else's dream, either because they push it on you or because it sort of creeps in subtly because you're encouraged to, follow these other dreams, which are not necessarily yours and sometimes not even really all that particularly good for you. Uh, and they can come from various and sundry sources. The media is a big source. Your various and sundry uh, political organizations and ideologies, your family, the imprint of the attitudes of the town where you grow up or the towns. I moved around a bit, as I started to mention in the last video. Um, I suppose the point that I was trying to make in that presentation is that uh, it's important, or at least some of us think it's important, uh, for us to have our own dreams, and to sort out some of these other influences, and to get a clearer idea of what's ours and what's sort of been pushed on us. I mean, I'm sure you're all familiar with the story of the family who's always sent their children to law school or always sent their children to medical school, and they send the next one that comes up to law school or medical school, and it just it's not their thing. It just doesn't work. I even met a fellow once who he'd gone through medical school, finished his internship. He was licensed to practice as a doctor, but he just couldn't do it. It wasn't it, it wasn't really his thing. There were friends and family, and everybody, it's great to be a doctor, rah da 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 da, and there's a lot of things pushing him in that direction, but somehow he managed to get through all the academic details, and even most in the internship, maybe all of it. I don't remember exactly, but he said, I'm not doing this, and he went and he started driving a taxi. Uh, it's things like that happen from time to time. There's also a story that you may or may not be familiar with, and it's particularly it's one of these things that is particularly notable in French culture, and it's that the young person goes out and they fulfill all their obligations in terms of their work, their education, all this other good stuff to their family. They rise up to a reasonably high position, and that by the time they're in their early 40s, they're doing well. Uh, they're basically set, but it's not really what they want, uh, and they walk away from it. They go and do something else. Some of them just go and wander the countryside. Well, these days I'm not so sure because things are a little stirred up due to some other issues. But it's people say there's a tradition in at least one part of French culture, and I think in some of the other European cultures, where yes, you fulfill your obligations. You give to these other dreams what you have to give, what you're supposed to give, or it's again, that's, are you supposed to do that? Well, that's the picture, that's the plan, and then once you more or less paid your dues, You've, successfully managed to acquire a professional career and work in it for a few years and sort of prove yourself, then you hit that point where you can walk away. And people do. In the United States, I've seen that some in the United States too, although not it's not as common as in some parts of Europe. Uh, but the thing is, it's a different kind of a compromise. Uh, Here, well, in current culture, there's a strong tendency to uh, either either there's a lot of pressure for conformity, excuse me, either there's a lot of pressure for conformity, or there's a lot of pressure to find yourself and find your own way. Uh, More often than not, there's more pressure on the conformity side. But either one of these things may or may not be the right thing for you to do. The European compromise is to, pay your dues to the family dream, the state dream, whatever the dream is out there, that has this picture of you as somebody who's going to be working as say a bank executive or a lawyer or a doctor or whatever, and basically fulfilling what they think of as your obligation to them. Once you've paid your dues, do what you want. And people do. Some people just turn around, walk away one day. They leave, their their good job, uh, their money, their family, everything. They just walk away. That's kind of extreme, but it happens. Uh, I'm thinking that for you, and for me too, in many respects, uh, something that drastic isn't necessary. Uh, if you make your choices based on who you are in the first place, then you don't get to a point where that's necessary. Now, you may get to a point where that's part of your plan, part of your picture, and then that's a whole different story, because then it's still an expression, an expression of who you are, both the fulfilling the obligations and the walking away from it. Now, there's, obviously there are a lot of cultural differences, and there's a lot of there's a different degree of emphasis on what do you owe to your society, to your family, uh, to your culture, for that matter. Uh, and yeah, if you know yourself, then you can make more reasonable decisions about that. And you can make decisions of what do you want to give and what are you obligated to give. I mean, it's unfortunately in our society, in the modern world in general, I'm not sure how it. I don't know enough about some of the other cultures, uh, some of the other European cultures, even some of the other English-speaking cultures, but I don't know enough about the uh, degree of or the role of obligation in those other societies. I tend to get the impression in the 21st century that there's most of that stuff is kind of unspoken, and that yeah, there are little pockets where there's still a strong sense of obligation, but for the most part, everything has sort of become nebulous, kind of misty, foggy, and that's another really good reason to get a good grip on knowing who you are, because then these other things can you can work out the compromises with what is and make most, if not most of your life and most of your of what you do and most of your decisions, they can be guided by who you are, being an expression of who you are. There's a huge amount of confusion these days, and I talked about the confusion factor a little bit before when I mentioned the media. If you looked at the media, you'd think you'd think that our world was completely crazy. Well, maybe it is, but not in our in our immediate personal experience. In most cases, and again, depending on where you live and what you're dealing with. But there's also a rampant epidemic of depression among young people and teenagers that's been going on for a couple of decades now. The suicide rates are up. The documented clinical depression is up, and it's like there's something wrong here. And part of what's wrong is there's confusion. People are not encouraged to know who they are, and on the other side of it, they are not given a clear picture of what their obligations are, or what the trade-off is. I mean, it comes back to another issue that I've brought up before from time to time, is that in a free society, there is a balance between individual liberty and the needs of the community. And by the needs of the community, I'm talking about basic civil order, basic security, things like that. Sometimes the community becomes oppressive and tries to limit or suppress or regulate too much of what should be left up to individual choice or individual choice and preference. And on the other side of it, sometimes you get a situation where the individual practically runs wild, and it doesn't. I mean, and this is very disruptive in many ways to the society, and doesn't even realize that there's a problem with that. I mean, it's a little bit tricky, but there is a balance between community stability and security and individual liberty and individual fulfillment. There's a balance between those things. Life is full of compromises. You have to make compromises. People who say no compromises are probably lying to themselves. You have to integrate this. I mean, you have to live in the world. You have to live in a community. You don't necessarily have to live in a family after a certain point in your life, and some people do leave home awfully early, but and some of you may choose to and look at your ideal as living somewhere on a mountain where you can do what you want and nobody will complain because there's nobody close enough to even hear what you're doing. There are advantages and disadvantages to that, but if that's who you are, if that's what you really want, then go for it. And again, this other picture that I presented to you earlier, if you feel that you have obligations that you need to discharge before you can do what you want with your life, well then by all means get them out of the way. Go to law school, go to med school, go to whatever school bankers go to, whatever, whatever track you feel you have an obligation to fulfill, to give back or to satisfy the patterns in your family or your community. When you're done with that, and usually that happens sometime around midlife, around the 40s, you can walk away from it if you want to. Chances are given how materialistic our society is, you will probably be hooked and addicted to all these goodies, and the whole idea of having a lot of money in your pocket. Well, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, but if it's an obstruction to being who you are, of expressing yourself, of being all you can be, and of doing something with your life other than what you were obligated to do with the first part of it, then it's a problem. And the other thing is, I mean, there's so much confusion about what what exactly are your obligations. You get different messages from different directions, and what who exactly are you? I mean, most people don't even try to tell you who you are. They tell you who they want you to be, but they don't really care who you are, and that's also a problem, and that bleeds over into a lot of other areas of life as well. Now, I didn't realize I was going to get quite so involved in this particular video. I'm glad I made it though, and I hope that helps give you some perspective on how to handle who you are once you figure out who that is. Some of you will have a pretty good idea of who you are right off the bat, but you still have to deal with these conflicting messages. You still have to deal with conflicting pictures of who you think you should be versus who other people think you should be. And you still have to work out a reasonable compromise between what's going to let you express yourself to the max and what's going to be compatible with living in a community. Or maybe you'll decide that you want to express yourself in ways that they just won't fit in a community. Well, great. Find a place out there and you can raise all the hell you want. But most of us like to have social interaction, the conveniences of modern life, and access to urban life. There are a lot of problems with cities these days. I would really like to see a renaissance of the cities. But right now, most of them are at least in part dumps, basically. And they haven't been kept up. In some parts of some cities, law and order is not even maintained. Cities, I agree with Aristotle. You can't know what or who a human being is unless you see them in the city. The city is the cultural expression of human endeavor. There are great things to be said about the country too, but culture and the whole social machine, it comes to be in the city, and cities. Well, this is a whole other topic, but I would love to see cities revitalized. If there was any, if I have any opportunities, you bet I will work on it. Anyway, I'm running real close to my maximum time now. I hope I clarified a little bit. I hope I helped you to clarify how to, first of all, sort out the external influences that cloud up the picture of who you are and make it hard even for you to be sure of who who that is, and some of the other things about influences and things to be taken into account, and this dynamic between the individual and the community. It's it's something that our politicians haven't been paying much attention to for quite some time either. Uh, they they in my opinion, and from my observations, rather than coming down on the side of the community or on the side of the individual, of promoting either side of that, they come down somewhere ideological, that both the community interests and the champions of individual liberty look at and say, "What? Do we live on the same planet?" But anyway, that's a whole other issue. Whole other issue. Anyway, for tonight, you have a great one, and we'll continue next time. We're getting closer and closer to that point where we're going to talk about crafting a vision, and we're getting closer and closer to that point where I'm going to have a link up so that you can access some of these resources that I've talked about. Have a great night.